Welcome to my review for Doom 3. Yeah, let's go with this as a review for Doom 3. I'm going to touch a little bit on my history with the Doom franchise, but for the most part, this will be about Doom 3, although there will be a lot of comparisons with the original. Now, this is a review for Doom 3 on the PS3 for the re-release that came out in 2012. I'll admit, when I first heard of this collection coming out for PS3, in my head, I was really thinking I'm buying Doom 1, which comes with Doom 2 and Doom 3. Because I love the first Doom game. I played it all the time on PC when it first came out, and for several years after that. I think in their earlier career, id Software was really the company that could set the bar for first-person shooter games. Whenever they came out with a new one, it seemed like you knew what everyone else was going to do until they released their next one. Going back to Wolfenstein 3D, then of course Doom, and then Quake. And even playing Doom 1 over again, which I did prior to playing Doom 3, after all these years, I can say that it has held up incredibly, and still provides much more fun than many first-person shooters that came out years after it. So after replaying Doom 1 and Doom 2, I went on to this one. This is the first time I've played Doom 3. When it originally came out, I had a PS2. I've never owned an Xbox, whether that be the original or the 360. And when Doom 3 came out, I really didn't look to my PC anymore as a gaming machine. And since it wasn't out on PS2, I ended up having to pass on it. So I was looking forward to finally getting a chance to playing it. And the short version is, I enjoyed it. I had fun, but not as much fun as I had with the previous Doom installments. And I'm going to get to that part in a moment, but I would like to say that this version of Doom 3 is probably more to my liking than the original one would have been. I remember when Doom 3 came out the first time, people were complaining you couldn't hold the flashlight and shoot at the same time. And then when Doom 3 was re-released just last year, people were complaining you can hold the flashlight and shoot at the same time. The whole point was that it was dark, which made it scary. And I gotta tell you, if I had to play this game without being able to hold a flashlight and shoot at the same time, it would have drove me nuts. I don't think it would have helped with immersion at all. It just would have been irritating. Again, some will say that it takes away from it, because it's supposed to be so dark, and you're supposed to have such a hard time seeing what's coming at you, and that's part of the appeal of the game. But when you look at what it offers as a first-person shooter, it's kind of a one-trick pony in that respect. It's all just dark. That's the whole thing about the game, and that's not enough for me. 80% of the levels look so similar. You're walking down the same gray, dark hallways where you can barely see a thing. The enemies coming at you, you can barely appreciate what little detail they have. And at first, yeah, it is kind of creepy, but you just get used to it so quick, since it's always that way. There's barely any contrast to get you worried about when you're entering a dark room. So here's my first direct comparison with the original Doom. It had great balance in that respect. The original Doom, the levels were so varied from stage to stage. They had interesting maps, perhaps set in unrealistic layouts and environments, but without trying to make it seem plausible, it made it more fun. And because everything wasn't so dark, when you did get to a dimly lit room, you were actually worried to go in there. With this one, you can't be worried to go in to the dimly lit room because almost every room is dimly lit. And in these rooms are, of course, the bad guys. Mostly demons. And mostly looking the same. That's the other advantage I think the original Doom had. I mean, you can tell the difference between the different adversaries you come up against in Doom 3, but there's a good chunk of them where there isn't a whole lot that separates them from each other. They all kind of have this hairless, leathery look to them. And they're all kind of shiny as well. When the original Doom, I found each of the enemies had a lot more character to them. Definitely very different looks, all very on-site, easily identifiable to what you were up against. In fact, they had a little bit more variety in Doom 3 once you got into Hell itself, because I found the imps had this charred skin kind of look onto them, and weren't so smooth like everything else was. And Hell, that was another point. Sure, of course, you went through Hell in the first Doom, but it took a while. It was a whole episode getting through that. In Doom 3, you were only there for a very short period of time compared to the rest of the game. And there's a lot of game there. I mean, it took me over 10 hours to get through it for the first time, so it's not like it's lacking gameplay, but most of it takes place in the Mars complex, which, as I said earlier, everywhere just kind of looks the same. And then you finally get to Hell, and you're there for a blink of an eye compared to the rest of the game. There's better weapon variety in Doom 3, I'll give it that much. You got your handgun, which you never used, just like in the first game. Shotgun, of course. Chain gun, you got some extra energy weapons now, along with your rocket launcher and BFG, all that kind of good stuff. Unfortunately, again, it didn't really feel like the weapons had the same kind of impact or force that they had in the first game. They all felt like they were pretty lightweight weapons as you're going through these levels. And in fact, a lot of things felt flipped. I remember using the chain gun in Doom 1, and you always got that impression that the bad guys were so much in pain from getting shot in that they couldn't fight back well enough. Where in this one seems to be the reverse. I mean, you take one hit and your camera starts swaying all over the place and you're disorientated, which leaves you open very easily for another shot, which I suppose is supposed to add some realism to it and add a certain aspect to it of challenge, and that was fine, but it did get annoying sometimes. And sure enough, the shot was going to come from behind, because tied in with the whole everything is dark, everyone comes up from behind. I mean, you walk into a room, you're pretty much going to be guaranteed some bad guy's going to teleport in front of you, and there'll be one behind you as well. And that suffers from the same problem as the dark. Sure, the first couple times you kind of go, ah, someone's behind me too. But by the 20th time, the 50th time, the 100th time, like, okay, I'll walk in this room, there's the guy in front, I better turn around to get the surprise guy that's behind me. You can't create suspense with repetition. So I know it sounds like I'm coming down on the game pretty hard. It's not a bad game, it was still a fun first-person shooter. It did have some annoyances. I don't think there's a map available in the game. If there is, I couldn't find where the map was. But there are certain points where I thought it desperately needed a map. But overall, still glad I picked it up, still glad I went through it, but I missed it feeling like a Doom game. It didn't have the crazy levels where you had a nice combination of environments, sometimes tight corridors, sometimes nice big open areas where you have lots of guys coming at you and you can strafe around them. There just didn't feel like there was as much variety as there was in the first game. It didn't feel as intense as it did in the first game. And maybe it's not fair to try and compare, considering the impact that the first game had. It's hard to live up to it. So Doom 3 is fun, but if I had to pick one to replay, I'd be replaying the first Doom again.